All right, confession. I married an Italian and I hate pasta. Okay, let me clarify. I thought I hated pasta my entire life until I tried homemade pasta. And then I realized it was just the box stuff I couldn't stand. Homemade pasta is on a totally different level, and if you've never tried it, you truly don't know what you're missing. I'm gonna show you how to make delicious, tender, flavorful pasta from scratch with just 3 ingredients that nearly everyone has on hand, in less hands-on time than it takes to boil the box stuff. And I'm also gonna share with you how to extend its shelf life by up to 6 months without refrigeration. Coming up. Okay, so I've been making pasta homemade off and on for several years now. I do still buy the box stuff clearly sometimes, but I never had a total flop making homemade pasta, even when I was a newbie. And I wanted to share that with you just to give you some comfort, because sometimes making stuff from scratch can be intimidating, right? But it's one of the easiest recipes, trust me. And you're never gonna wanna go back to the box stuff after you taste this. Hi, I'm Kelly, busy mom of 5 and lover of all things edible. If you're like me and you love food but hate the garbage in today's processed foods, I'm here to help. It brings me such joy to prepare scratch foods in my kitchen that are not only delicious but simple, budget-friendly, and mostly healthy. You're in for a treat. Okay, so like I said earlier, you need just 3 simple ingredients that anyone should have on hand. I'm really excited to get started, so let's hop in and take a crack at it. See what I did there? So you're gonna need eggs, all-purpose flour, and salt. As far as equipment is concerned, you can make this as easy or complicated as you want. You can let modern kitchen equipment do the work for you, which many times I do go that route to free me up for other kitchen tasks. Or you can go all Italian Nonna on it and really get your hands in there. It's a great workout. There's just something about working with your hands that makes your meal even more satisfying. Today we're going to discuss both methods, and I'm going to show you the processes from start to finish. That way you can decide which road you'd like to take. Feel free to skip ahead to the timestamps below if you already know which method you prefer. So we're going to start with the machine method just because our dough takes a little time to rest, and it'll get me on to the next batch of dough just a little bit quicker. To your food processor, you're going to add the following: 2 large eggs, 1.5 cups of all-purpose flour, that's about 180 grams, and a generous pinch of salt, about 1/2 teaspoon. I just eyeball it. One mistake people make with pasta dough is thinking that you don't need to knead it. You need to. It needs to be kneaded. This will give you the best texture in the long run. The amount of time fluctuates, however. I recommend giving it at least a few good minutes. If you have the time, 7 to 8 minutes is ideal. You can cut a few corners here without much noticeable difference. It's a very forgiving dough. I'm sorry. All right, so next we're gonna go old school. You just need a clean countertop or another decently sized space to work with. A cutting board even works in a pinch. So you're gonna measure out your flour. I'm weighing mine. I just like to do that for accuracy's sake. You're just gonna pile up your flour on your work surface, and you're gonna make a decent sized well inside. You're basically making a little swimming pool for your little eggies to go in. In they go. And you don't want them falling overboard, so plan accordingly. And a healthy dose of salt. So you're just gonna start scrambling those eggs. Slow and gentle at first, and after they're mixed up a bit, you're gonna start slowly bringing down those Jericho walls, just incorporating them into the center a little at a time until the mixture is thick enough to hold its own. And then you can even get a little crazier and get your hands involved. I like to use a bench scraper for a lot of things. As you can see, this is a little messier, a little more involved, but it can be fun. You can get the kids involved if they're interested. Working with your hands can be enjoyable. You're going to need this one as well. 7 to 8 minutes is ideal, but if you're in a rush or if you have sore biceps, you can cut a few corners here without much noticeable difference. Again, if your dough is sticky, add a little more flour. If your dough is dry, splash in a little bit of water. All right, so I've been kneading it for a couple minutes now. I could probably go a little longer, but I got stuff to do. So what you're gonna do now is you're gonna either cover it in plastic wrap so it doesn't dry out, or you can even just flip a bowl upside down on top of it and let it sit for about a half an hour. This gives the gluten and you time to relax a bit. Okay, now I don't know if you can see this on camera, but this one is has a little bit more moisture than the other one had, and I didn't even add any water to this one. It's just the difference in the size of eggs. Like I said, don't worry about it. This is actually a preferable texture. And I think that is probably one of the plus sides of mixing by hand, because when you're doing it in the food processor, you know, you're putting everything in and you're kind of warring it, and you can't really control it a little at a time like you can when you're doing it by hand. But I'm not gonna lie, I mostly use the food processor just because it's quicker. I'm all sweaty from kneading all that dough. All right, so you are gonna wrap this too and let it sit for about a half an hour. All right, so our first dough is ready. It's been sitting about a half an hour, and we are going to begin the rolling out process. You want to work with a small bit of dough at a time here so it doesn't get dried out. So I'm cutting it into quarters, and you're going to cover the rest until you're ready for it. Now you're going to want to sprinkle your dough just so it doesn't stick to whatever you're using to roll it out with. So I like to flatten my dough out first, just a little bit by hand to give it a head start, and just make kind of a little rectangle-ish shape. It's not gonna be perfect, doesn't have to be. I'm actually using semolina flour to sprinkle my dough and my work surface. You can use all-purpose flour, and I have many times. It's just that this is very different consistency, and it really doesn't absorb into your dough too much, so it's not going to add more toughness to your flour dough. For this method, I'm actually going to use a pasta roller that attaches right to your table. This is what I have. I have the attachment that goes on that spins it. I have the little vice grip that holds it to the table securely. And I have this, which is the cutter attachment. This doesn't usually come with it when you buy it. It's a separate option, but it makes it really nice for cutting out your dough. Totally not necessary. It's just another part. And this specific one has two options. The wider fettuccine one, which is the one that I typically use, and then the really skinny spaghetti. All right, so now I'm gonna attach my pasta roller to the table and we're gonna get started. Lefty loosey, righty tighty. All right, she's not going anywhere. Get in there, yeah. All right, so we're gonna start out with the widest setting on here, which is a 7. We're gonna feed it through twice with each thickness. And you're just gonna make sure to sprinkle your work area so that you can continue to keep your dough coated. You don't want it to stick to your machine. This is where a second set of hands comes in handy. My children actually aren't awake yet because it's super early, but usually one of them's here helping me roll while I guide it through. Once it starts going through, you can kind of let go of it, because you want to use your hand under to guide it out so it's not piling up on itself. I'm going to keep going until it's at your desired thickness. I'm going to setting number 2. Whoops. Ah! You might be ugly, but you're still going to taste good, aren't you? Yes, you are. This gets quite long depending on how thin you're going. So I usually, it's getting close to my last setting, I will cut it in half because we don't want our noodles that long anyway. Sometimes I'll cut it in thirds if I'm doing egg noodles for a soup. I'm doing spaghetti, I'll usually cut it in half. So it just depends. I'm doing egg noodles in this particular circumstance, and we're just gonna go through, woo! Make sure you push while you're spinning. Little part I forgot to add there. As you can see, it's pretty thin. Can't quite see through it, but you can see your fingers through it. All right, now I'm gonna show you the rest of the process. I'm not gonna roll out all the dough right now because I wanna bore you. So at this point, you have several options. You have the attachment for cutting out your dough. You can attach that and you can cut out your noodles that way. You can also cut them by hand, which I'm gonna show you in the next example. So for now, we're gonna cut these out with the attachment. Just make sure you have some flour on there. And you're just going to take your handle and transfer it over to here. And we're using our fettuccine attachment. And it is as simple as that. And there you go, you got pasta, fresh pasta.
Mamma mia!
So once it's finished, we're going to make sure it's dusted well so the pasta doesn't stick to itself. And you can either cook them immediately, you can hang them to dry, or you can swirl them up into little pasta sacks to dry that way if they're long enough. I'm just gonna put them on a cookie sheet for now, and we're gonna move on to our next method. Another option that you can do with your pasta is you can leave it whole in sheets like this, and you can use it for lasagna. Best lasagna ever. When I'm making homemade pasta, I always like to make extra because the kitchen and myself are already covered in flour, and I already have all the equipment out, so I figure I might as well make extra to have some for the future. Always thinking ahead when scratch cooking really saves time, money, and hassle. For our next method, we're gonna start out the same way with just a quarter of the dough. Keep the rest covered for later so it doesn't dry out. And I like to shape my dough as close to a rectangle as possible. Like I said before, it's really not that important. I just like to have uniform sizes. I feel like it cooks more consistently and it just looks prettier. I think it's just the perfectionist in me. All right, so this one's a little more laborious, clearly. You're just gonna roll it until you have it at the thickness that you want. I recommend going pretty thin because most people just prefer the texture when it's on the thinner side. Now at this point, you have several options. You can cut with a pizza cutter, you can dust it a little bit more and fold it several times and slice with a sharp knife or your bench scraper. Egg noodles, spaghetti noodles, fettuccine. Drying is the same as before. I finally found myself an official pasta drying rack at a thrift store last summer, but for years I actually used a clean broomstick propped up on a chair and our dinner table. Use what you got. I think one of the kids stole one of my sticks. So yeah, and you just kind of hang it like this. And I mean, you can do multiple pieces at once, whatever, do what works. This works really good for the longer ones, not so much for the teeny ones. They may take several hours or even overnight to dry depending on the humidity of your kitchen. You definitely want to make sure they're all the way dry before storing them though. Or, hello mold, my old friend.
Hello.
Okay, so if you want to cook your pasta immediately, you want to bring your water to a rolling boil. Make sure you generously salt it. And then you're just going to drop it in. Fresh pasta only takes about 2 minutes. Okay, so if you made extra, I'm going to give you a few options for preserving it, but first I wanted to ask you, what's your favorite pasta dish? Let me know in the comments. And if you got value from this video, I'd love it if you could do me a solid and tap that like button. It helps my video reach more mamas just like you who desire to feed their families wholesome, delicious. It helps my message reach mamas just like you who desire to feed their families wholesome, delicious food made from scratch. All right, now let's talk storage because you want to make the most of the time you spent in the kitchen. So let's get it stored away properly. So you can store pasta for up to 1 day in an airtight container in the refrigerator. Drying is my preferred method for long-term storage, and it just requires that your noodles are completely dry. You can test them by attempting to twist them. If they bend, that means they still have moisture in them. You'll know they're completely dry when they break instead. Dried pasta stored properly in an airtight container or bag should store in your pantry for anywhere from 4 to 6 months. And you can freeze pasta as well. The entire dough ball wrapped tightly in plastic and put in a freezer bag or vacuum sealed will keep for about 4 to 6 weeks. Just thaw overnight in the fridge before proceeding with the instructions that I gave earlier. You can also freeze the formed noodles. I like to flash freeze them on a cookie sheet and then store them in a freezer bag. They don't keep as long with this method, but a few weeks is typically fine. And then I just put them directly in the boiling water. They may need 1 extra minute to cook. All right, so when your pasta is finished cooking, you are just gonna remove it to a dish and toss it in your favorite sauce. Olive oil, butter, whatever you want to use. You can put it in soup. The possibilities are endless. My kids are over the moon about plain old spaghetti. I like to serve mine with a nice stroganoff or smothered with gravy and tender beef slices. We also use these noodles in chicken noodle soup and other soups and casseroles. However you serve it, I hope that you thoroughly enjoy it, both the process of making it with your hands and the eating of it. As always, you can find a link to the printable recipe in the description of this video and on my website. Until next time.